Today on the Potential Psychology podcast.
Nurture is actually the beacon beam that is about our physical health. It's about nurturing our energy. Today, we are going to look quite simply at sleep. There's a lot of stuff going around about, exercise and meditation and what we should eat, but sleep sometimes gets left behind, but it is actually a mental health superpower. We're the only species that would deny ourselves sleep in order to do other things. And we seem to think sometimes, in order to get more done, I'll stay up late and I'll get more done. But we don't realise we're robbing ourselves. So what we are interested in is both quantity and quality of sleep. And we know that there are some very important things that influence the quality of our sleep. And so what we know is that, weirdly, a good night's sleep starts the moment we wake up.
Welcome to the Potential Psychology podcast. I'm your host, psychologist Ellen Jackson, and this is the show in which we explore what it is to be human and how we as humans can fulfill our potential. Hello and welcome. This is the Potential Psychology podcast and our special series, How to Thrive, with my co-host, Marie McLeod. Hello, Marie.
Hey, Ellen.
Good to have you here again. We are getting to the end of our series of conversations about Beacon, a model of how to thrive. But before we get to our next element, today's topic, which is N for nurture, the very end of the Beacon, we're going to check in, I think, on how we went with our last topic, which was optimism and our little quest that we both undertook. How did you go, Marie?
Well, so our quest from last time for the O of Beacon, which is optimism, and what we looked at there was the power of positive emotions and how having these little moments, these little micro moments that Professor Barbara Fredrickson calls them, that these little moments when we experience a moment of joy or hope, pride, love, serenity, gratitude, those little moments, that they're the tiny engines that drive our well-being. So this quest that we had set was asking people to write down things that reliably give them that little lift of one of those emotions. Now, remembering, of course, that sometimes the positive emotion we need might be a quiet one, like serenity. And you and I have just touched in before we started recording about how it's the end of the year. We've had kids at home. They've gone back to school, what seems like for a micro moment, and now they're back home for 2 months in the holidays. And perhaps serenity is a positive emotion that we need more of. And so we asked that we write down a positivity list or make a joy jar, and perhaps doing that with family or with teens or whatever. I didn't overcomplicate it. I wrote mine on a sticky note, my little Kiki Cake sticky note, and it's
For those listening in, Marie's holding up a very small little sticky note with lots of words written on it. You've done well to fit them all on.
Because you know what happened? I stuck it up and I lost it. And so I had to just rewrite it because it fell off. So there is a lesson. Don't put it in a space that you won't be able to find it again. So I did do my list, and these were little things that I would remind myself of when I got into a funk, of some things that I could go and do. So I said, go for a walk outside and look up. Like, for me to be able to look up at the sky and get that sense of perspective that, there's a whole wide world out there, and what I'm dealing with right now is probably not as big as I think it might be. Phoning a friend. Sometimes there are particular people who I know that will just lift me or listen. Go for a walk on the beach. Going to the op shops. I love op shops.
Oh, that's cool.
It uses all my strengths of creativity and looking for cool stuff. Playing with little people. So I'm lucky enough to have 4 little nephews under 4 and 2 little godsons. And so when I get to hang out with them, it's just so fun in a way that I didn't feel like it when mine were little. Now I can sort of play and give them back. It's fun. Petting the puppy. We're about to get another one, which is very exciting. Crazy and exciting. For me, the serenity comes from reminding myself to slow down, sit down and rest. Calling my mum is usually something that's very sort of calming and lovely. Looking back at photos of things that we've done, planning a trip, doing something kind, and remembering my why. Sometimes I just have to remember what my why is and get myself recentered on what it's all about. So that was my list.
Yeah, that's a fabulous list.
just was able to kind of go to that over the week and just go, well, which of those things might work for me in this moment? And making sure that I'm sort of spreading some of those little jolts of joy through my day.
Fantastic.
Did you have any jolts of joy that you deliberately put into your days across the last week, Ellen?
I did. I had some, and you're still a step ahead of me because I didn't write mine down, but I did put them into action, and I'm figuring that's probably the important part.
Well, together we can do this.
So a little like you, yes, end of the year, things are feeling a bit less serene than perhaps I'd like them to. There's still a lot to do, and like I think pretty much everybody on the planet, burnout and exhaustion has set in here too. So the things that I have implemented that have made a difference, including as recently as this morning, was taking the dog for a walk, which I know I've mentioned a lot before, but it's the combination for me of being, physical movement, beautiful weather, which we have today, which is glorious, and being outdoors. I pop music in my headphones. So music's a big one for me. It has been my entire life. I've used it always for mood regulation. In fact, it was interesting because I got my Spotify 2020 summary. So it gave me my little, rundown on what my top tunes are. And one of the things that it talks about is or mentions is your kind of I think they call it your aura or something, but it's kind of like the mood type music that have been your go-to. And I've had two. I've had mellow was one and confident was the other. Wow. So it actually gives them these labels, so emotion labels. So I can see that. They were sort of mellow. There's times when you need that kind of mellow, calming sort of sound. But for me too, that mood boost of the confident music, happy, strong, positive is very much part of the flavour of my playlists, I guess. So that's a big part of my walking. So there's kind of the pet therapy, the outdoors, the movement, the music. And then because I'm walking the dog, more often than not, I have random conversations with strangers because they want to pat the dog, or they say hello, or they've got a dog, or you're passing by, or they ask how old she is, or whatever it might be. So a whole lot of those little things. So that has been, including this morning when I thought I've got so many other things I ought to be doing, but I really feel I need to do this to give me my jolt of joy to get me through today.
Well done.
And then the other things I've been doing have been Netflix. So again, I'm watching Succession at the moment. I don't know if anybody else is watching Succession, but I'm really enjoying it, even though the characters are all terrible, terrible people. There's something, maybe it's the psychologist in me, is intrigued by these people. So I'm really enjoying that. So I'm just taking time out to, prioritising myself and having that as a bit of a kind of a distraction. And again, something that I'm enjoying doing, putting myself, in my permission zone of allowing myself to do things like that.
Yes.
And the other thing I did was actually last week on Friday, I had a child home from school and I, again, had a million things to do. And I said, you know what, let's jump on the train and go into Melbourne. And we spent the day doing some Christmas shopping and just enjoying, again, being out in the lovely sunshine, enjoying his company. We kept it very casual. We just caught the train in, potted about, got a few things done. For me, a sense of achievement's a big mood boost as well. So being able to tick a few Christmas gifts off the list was really satisfying. And just, spend a day having fun but being a bit chill.
Oh, that's so nice.
So the key things that have been, and good reminders, I think especially, and this might be important for our listeners to reflect on as well, that when things get really busy and you are feeling the pressure and the overwhelm, that they are probably the times when you do have to say, hold on, what do I need here? What's the little jolt of joy that I need? What's my micro moment of positive emotion to keep myself going and to lift myself out if I'm starting to get to that anxious or despondent place that we all get to at times. So that was me.
Absolutely. Oh, well done us. We spent little moments, and it's about the choices we make, isn't it? I think it's that combination, like we spoke last week, of noticing the things that happen when they happen, that they are joyful or serene, or that we get awe or gratitude from, but also deliberately making an intention to create those. So good. Well, that's good. Well, I feel like we've able to move on from O and into the N of Beacon today. So are you ready to hear about that, Ellen?
Yes. Tell us what we're talking about in relation to N and nurture.
So, nurture is actually the beacon beam that is about our physical health. And particularly here, we know the interplay between our physical health and our mental health. And in the work that I do, there are 4 things that we focus on here: eating, moving, sleeping, and being mindful. Today, we'll obviously only focus on one of those. But I guess what I wanted to say is that the paramount piece here is about energy. It's about nurturing our energy and thinking about what are those things that can help us to sustain, maintain the energy that we need to thrive, because it's very difficult to thrive if we don't have energy. It's like a very precious resource. And so we do need to think about the things that help us to stabilise that. And it's different from day to day. You know, some days we might need a little more sleep. Some days we need to kind of move more. Some days we need sort of mindfulness. And all days we need to think about sort of, you know, what we're putting in our body. And so this, of course, isn't about thinking about diets or how we look or over exercising or under eating or any of those things. It's about, what does my body need? Just like a car, what does a car need in terms of to keep it running well? It needs the right fuel, and for that fuel to be sort of sustained across the journey. So I have a little bit of an acronym that I sometimes use for energy, which covers some of the main points around what we would normally cover in our fleshed out version. So reminder that we do have a full e-learning suite of Beacon that anyone might want to access at any time, and they can contact me at www.needtoseesomeone.com. And so energy, the acronym, the E says eat like a Greek, because we know that actually the Mediterranean diet and way of eating is what the research is showing is really great for maintaining our energy. The E of energy is about nurturing our gut health. Again, lots of science now about and relationship between our brain and our gut and mood. E of energy is about exercising even when you think you can't. You know, so even this morning when we both got up and we thought, I can't do it, but we did go and walk the dog and we did get out inside the sunshine. R is for relaxing your mind with the breath. Super important to, you know the times that you need to be mindful and the way that the breath is a switch for us and how we can use that. The G is about getting good sleep. The Y of energy is actually perhaps the most important thing. The Y is you do it your way. There is so much stuff in this space that's blaring at us about do this, do that, eat this, move this way, move that way, meditation, mindfulness. And we just have to be mindful consumers of all of that and come back and say, what is it that my body needs to stay energized? And so that's my sort of quick reference of thinking about energy. Today, we are going to look quite simply at sleep, because I think you and I spoke about it last time. It's possibly the poor relation of those things. There's a lot of stuff going around about, exercise and meditation and what we should eat, but sleep sometimes gets left behind, but it is actually a mental health superpower. We're the only species that would deny ourselves sleep in order to do other things. And we seem to think sometimes, in order to, you mentioned accomplishment, in order to get more done, I'll stay up late and I'll get more done. But we don't realise we're robbing ourselves. And so some of the data around this, and you'll be familiar with this as well, Ellen, that, 90 minutes of lost sleep, our focus is reduced by a third the next day. 90 minutes. So that means if I go to bed an hour and a half later, the next day, I'm a third less alert than I would have been otherwise. And 4 hours of lost sleep is as much impairment as drinking a 6-pack of beer. So those things were very astounding for me. And so I'm interested for you, Ellen, because I know this is something that you work on with clients as well, in terms of why do we need to sleep? Why do we need it? Why should we be prioritising it? Because I think it's easy for us to just think it's a state of being dormant and it doesn't really have much function, but it is so much more important than that. So what's your sort of take on sleep and its power?
Yeah, well, look, sleep is a big one for me. Anyone who knows me, my husband tells me that I could sleep for Australia. I have always been a good sleeper, but I think possibly less so as I get a little bit older, but I think it's it does come very much from my own personal experience. I am one of those people who needs a good 8 hours of sleep to feel like I'm functioning well. I'm very aware of that. I've always been very aware of that. And it's interesting what you say about that impact of reduced sleep and how it does reduce our productivity and some of our cognitive capabilities. I distinctly remember having one of those nights that anyone who's had small children would remember or may still be experiencing, of minimal sleep because of an unwell infant, and driving the next day to go, I think I was going to the chemist to get for medicine or something or other, and really feeling like, I don't think I should be on the road. I don't feel like I'm safe.
That's right.
And then, seeing some of those stats on the impact of sleep deprivation on your ability, your reaction time, your cognitive capability, and how that does equate to driving, potentially under the influence and those sorts of things. So
it is a risk.
It is, yeah. It certainly felt like a risk on that particular day. Anyway, so sleep for me, when I'm working with clients around this and talking about it, because you're right, it is something that we tend to neglect. We do favour activity or responsibility or all the other bits and pieces instead of prioritising sleep. And I love that piece about the fact that we're the only species who will do that, because I'm conscious that my dog is absolutely fast asleep.
Oh, yes. I've had a big run on the beach this morning and he's like, oh, sleepy time.
It's kind of like, I'll just nap now. I'm like, goodness, couldn't you imagine? So that productivity, but also our reaction time, our ability to think, our ability to be able to be at our most
functional.
I want to say creative, but it's functional. Interestingly, there is actually a little bit of research. I'll have to dig it out, but I do remember reading it to say that sometimes when we're slightly sleep deprived, our creativity can be a little bit better, because we're less likely to be spending time. I think this is what it was, in that kind of prefrontal cortex part of our brain, that kind of thinking, planning bit. We're more likely to go a little bit offline into that default mode, or what Scott Barry Kaufman calls the imagination network. So there can be some benefits to a little bit of sleep deprivation. But the other thing I think that's really critical for me, and certainly something I try to emphasise when I'm working with clients, is emotional regulation and our ability to really regulate our emotions if we're sleep deprived. We all know, and I tell a story of having, again, very small children, and I generally consider myself to be a capable person, and getting the pram out of the boot of the car at the shopping centre to go and do the groceries or whatever we were doing, and not being able to put the pram together because some of those prams are just really annoying, and just bursting into tears, standing in the car park, just bursting into tears, and then calling my husband, although I'm not quite sure what I thought he was going to do in that moment, given that he was in the office some kilometres away. But it was just that complete feeling of overwhelm and hopelessness and
the meltdown,
an inability to problem solve. It was a little meltdown, and it was because of that sleep deprivation, probably tied in with a few other things that go along with having small children. But you really do start to notice that, your ability to contain some of those perhaps less helpful emotions in the moment, like irritability or frustration or sadness or any of those things, which in and of themselves are not necessarily a problem, but the way they might manifest in that moment could be a problem if you're snapping at family or snapping at colleagues, or, just unable to kind of regulate that mood in a way that's helpful.
Just everything feels harder.
It does.
It just feels like you're pushing uphill all the time. Like, I just find myself constantly sighing and thinking, like, what's for dinner, and I have to do this, and I feel like
decision-making is hard.
Everything feels harder when you are not well rested, and certainly there is so much research, and I think we don't also realise all the processes that happen in our body and brain when we are at rest. Our body is busy repairing itself. Our brain is busy calibrating all the things that have happened in the day. And so there's a whole lot of repair that happens, our immune system.
Boosts immunity, yes.
Yeah, all of those things. And, I think sleep deprivation is also shown to now got a link to Alzheimer's. And so there are many, many reasons. And a fairly new book out, Why We Sleep, Matthew Clear,
Matthew
is
Walker.
that his name? Matthew Walker. Thank you. I was getting James Clear and Matthew Walker confused. So, yes, Matthew Walker. And I also love Michael Mosley's Fast Asleep as well. There's just so much good stuff in there. And as I say, I do think it's something that we don't prioritise because of the accomplishment, but because also we get sucked in to the escapism of social media at that time of night. So if we understand about ourselves that across the course of the day, later in the day, our serotonin goes down and our melatonin goes up, but our willpower is also sort of declining. So our ability to make good choices is kind of declining across the day. And so it's also a time that we are more likely to have arguments with other people or to have meltdowns. I know for me, that's a very pressure time as a parent. The kids are scratchy, I'm scratchy. They seem to want, me at that time when I'm just done. I'm like, no, like I can't do any more kind of kissing goodnights and story times and being told about this. And they get into a much more emotional state then. So I think, it's important for us to understand that as adults, we do need between 7 and 9 hours, as you say, and that children need more than that. There's some really good guidelines available from Headspace that our listeners could check out on that. But what we wanted to talk about today is, what do we do about this? Like what helps? Because oftentimes people might know that they're into sort of not very good habits and that they're so many people, and I'm not immune either, we're spending time watching TV, on Facebook, on Instagram, scrolling through things, and then we wish that we didn't do that because it is, something that's sucking us in, and we're spending precious, valuable time that we could be doing something that was more productive or sleeping so we're more productive the next day. Yeah. And so we know that those social media kind of things are very carefully gamified to release, I was going to say oxytocin then, that'd be nice, to releasing dopamine in our brains and to hold us in. They captivate us. And, our ability to kind of, as you say, regulate against those urges at that time of night isn't there. And so before we know it, we're scrolling, or we're doing, looking at work emails and things like that. And so one interesting thing that I had discovered about this is that most people have heard about blue light and, blue light isn't good for us and it stops us from being able to sleep. In fact, the blue light that emits from a phone or from an iPad or whatever is very small. It's not so much that prevents us from sleeping as the excitings, and the dopamine that we get from engagement with our devices. I don't know, Ellen, what are you like? Are you one of those good people that leaves their phone at the outside of the bedroom?
I am now, yes.
I'm impressed.
Yes, I can feel very virtuous in this moment. I have battled with it because, again, you do feel a little disingenuous when you're talking to people about how devices aren't helpful and put them away before you go to bed, et cetera, and then you find yourself not doing that.
Yes.
So I have battled with it, and I've had periods where it has crept back. But I can say consistently for the last maybe 6 months, maybe more, my phone gets parked where my office is and I do not have it by my bed. And it's largely because I actually had a couple of episodes of waking during the night and picking up the phone and then losing a couple of hours down a kind of Twitter rabbit hole, which was just insane, and realising how unhelpful that was for me. And the other thing was actually not so much about getting to sleep at night, because I wasn't too bad with that. It was not getting out of bed quite quickly enough in the morning because the phone was there. So I would pick it up and I go, I'll just check what the news is saying. I'll just read this. I'll just check that. And it was really delaying getting the day underway for me and consequently for the family.
Yes.
So I have been quite good at not putting the phone away. What I haven't always done so well has been sometimes watching things on Netflix on my laptop in bed and then, finding that it does, I'm just a little bit wired, perhaps, depending on what I've been watching, and therefore have not been able to sleep as well. So really trying to consciously manage that, choosing reading instead of the screen. So, it's really interesting, and it is interesting about that blue light fact. I think the makers perhaps of some of the blue light glasses have
benefited
done a
somewhat
good
from that
marketing
myth,
number on us to convince us that this is a thing.
Yes.
Because, yes, as far as I'm aware, the evidence isn't there for it being a
No.
thing either, and it is just the activity, as you say. But that is one thing. The other thing that I have been a big proponent of, and I know it works for me, is what I call getting all primary school about bedtime. So actually knowing, because this is where I think we can fall down sometimes, we just don't think through the number of hours perhaps we need to sleep, what time we need to get up in the morning, and therefore what time we realistically need to be in bed or, getting through that process of winding down at the end of the day. So it is very much like doing the same thing with our children. You need to wind down a little bit.
You do.
You need to make sure you've got all the tasks done, and then you need to make sure you're in bed at a time that is going to provide you with the opportunity to get your 8 hours sleep or whatever it is that you need. So
you need to have a bedtime.
You need to have a bedtime. Yeah, you absolutely need to have a bedtime, and you need to be conscious of that bedtime and winding down. So that's something that I do. I always aim to be in bed or, sleeping by 10:30. So that then allows me to kind of wake up 6:30 the next morning being well rested. So that's kind of what works for me. But then where I have got caught out has been, I sit at my desk or I might be doing something around the house that I'm suddenly conscious that it's 10:15 and I think,
oops,
if I've got to be in bed 10:30, then I've got an awful lot of things I still wanted to do. I might be getting school lunches ready or getting clothes ready for the next day or, putting the dog out, whatever it might be, just those series of end of day evening activities, boring as they are, and making sure that I'm doing that in an adequate time. So there's a lot of mindfulness around this. There's a lot of consciousness.
There's a need of planning.
Yeah, and that's boring and not any fun, but it's about the consequences. It would be nice. And I still have nights where I sit up and watch stuff on Netflix till 11:30, but it's rare. And it's knowing that perhaps I don't have a big day or an early start the next day, and maybe I can do a little bit of the catch up.
And that's the kind of what's that old saying? I'm borrowing from Peter to pay Paul or something like that.
Yeah.
You kind of know that I'm taking time tonight that I will lose tomorrow. And literally it's an equation. It's like a budget. If I stay up now, then tomorrow I'm going to get less done because my productivity is going to be reduced by a third. And am I up for that? Because that's the choice I'm making in that moment. And so I think, that's been really important for me. And I have gotten, I love that term, old primary school about it. And, I did have, a friend that had an alarm set on her phone to remind her to start to wind down for bed, which I think is not a bad idea. I've actually had an alarm on my phone to kiss my daughter goodnight because even though she's 16, she still loves that. And so that goes off at 8:45. And I said to her, that needs to happen before I'm ready to, start winding down, because otherwise I get cranky that it's, getting into my time that I need to. So, I've sort of started to try and be a bit more intentional about it as well. And I'm probably, more need to be headed around 9:30 for a 10 o'clock sleep because I'm probably one that gets up at 6 to go and exercise. So I need to head to bed earlier. So we wanted to think about this idea, Ellen, of sleep hygiene, which I hadn't previously heard of. And fortunately, it has nothing to do with cleaning the house or having a shower. Sleep hygiene is this concept of thinking about the habits that we can adopt and the processes that we can go through to ensure that we are more likely not just to have the amount of sleep that we need, but also the kind of quality of sleep that we need. Some very interesting work that's been done by Duncan Young, who's the head of wellbeing for the property part of Lend-Lease, and they have their leaders wear heart rate monitors. And I've actually had the privilege of wearing one of those and going through with a cohort that I was coaching with that. And what that does is it measures throughout the day the zones that we're in terms of our energy, but also while we sleep. And what is absolutely astonishing is that all sleep is not created equal in terms of restoring our energy. And so we know that sometimes we can actually be asleep but we're not getting that restoration that we need. And so for me, what happened when I wore that monitor is that I could see that I had very little daytime recovery. I was on. I had very little green, in my graphs at the end, but my sleep was very good, and that was the only thing saving me. Whereas for other people, what I was able to see from the people that I was coaching is that their sleeping pattern, even though they were asleep, it wasn't restorative. So what we are interested in is both quantity and quality of sleep. And we know that there are some very important things that influence the quality of our sleep. So things like alcohol, things like sugar, things like physical exercise, things like, having a wind down routine. And so what I wanted us to do is to set a bit of a quest, as we have been doing,
our quest
for our listeners to do a bit of a sleep hygiene checklist around some of those factors that have been shown to impact the quality of sleep that we get. And so what we know is that, weirdly, a good night's sleep starts the moment we wake up.
Mm-hmm.
A good night's sleep starts the moment we wake up. When we wake up in the morning, the best thing for us to do to reset our circadian rhythms is to get outside into the bright sunlight, because that sort of resets us, and preferably to be doing some early morning exercise. So you can hopefully combine those things like you did this morning, Ellen, out in the daylight, walking the dog, connecting with people.
Although it's fair to say mine wasn't particularly early, because that is not my way. It was a 9 o'clock walk.
Oh, well, it was still there. We're doing there. Grit and grace. We're forgiving ourselves for the things that are small and not and imperfect, remember. So we want to, first of all, set our sleep window, which is what you and I spoke about. So yours is kind of a 10:30 to 6:30, mine's a 10 to 6. So we're getting up at that time without pushing snooze. We're getting out into the light. We're hopefully doing some exercise. And then as we go through the day, conscious about what we eat, preferably we are eating more in that kind of Mediterranean diet way with lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of fibre, olive oil. Good news is we can have a glass or two of red wine. I love that. And then as we progress through the day, if we need to nap because we, exhausted ourselves or haven't slept, to do that no later than 2 p.m. and for no longer than 20 minutes. And then no coffee after 3 o'clock. Mm-hmm. I know some people say that they can drink coffee, and go to sleep and it has no impact. But certainly the things that seem to be showing in terms of how restorative our sleep is, that having caffeine after then and having alcohol late and exercising late all impact the quality of sleep that we have. So cutting off caffeine at 3 o'clock, we want to do no cardio exercise after 6 o'clock. So some people go to the gym in the evening and do, really fast, hard workouts. And again, that's not a great idea. Preferably we exercise in the morning. And we know as well in terms of our well-being that we know that 20 minutes of moderate exercise lifts our mood for the next 12 hours. We don't want to sleep through that. We want to get that benefit. So exercising early, stopping alcohol by 8 o'clock if we're aiming for a 10 o'clock bedtime, and, stopping on our technology by 9:30. So we've sort of got a pattern of things that we do across the day that we can sort of check in on. And we want to make our room nice and cool, around 18 degrees, and our body temperature cooler is for a better sleep. So those are the sort of things that I'd like our listeners, and we'll put obviously a cheat sheet of this on the resources tab of my website, needtoseesomeone.com. And so you can go and check through those 7 steps to splendid sleep. What a tongue twister that is. And just going through that. And many of those things you're probably already doing. So maybe just pick one. For me, I know I have to, you've already done it, but I need to get the phone out of the bedroom and start reading a book instead of reading my phone. So that's going to be my challenge for the week.
There were 2 things that you're talking about there, Marie, that I really like. One is the notion of thinking about rest as a 24-hour experience and not just as a nighttime experience. The use of biofeedback tools like your heart rate monitors and your watches and all of these things that we have access to now can be very informative as to those days, because I think, again, and we've talked a lot about self-compassion and the grit and grace piece, that there is still a lot of individual variation in some of these things as well. And some people just don't naturally sleep that well. And whilst I would always encourage people to attend a sleep clinic, of which there are many now, if you have experienced chronic issues with sleep, just to get some professional help. But there is still an element of individual variation in terms of the quantity of sleep and how people manage to sleep. And I think if we're able to think about it as a 24-hour cycle, perhaps I don't sleep that well during the night. Therefore, what can I do during the day that might help? And it might be naps. And we certainly have. I've interviewed Sarah McKay, neuroscientist, who is a great advocate for the nap. In fact, I think she did a TED talk on the topic, which I might pop in the show notes for today's episode. But also just that quiet downtime. You know, if you are a go person during the day, then that better sleep at night might be more critical than somebody who perhaps evens out their performance and rest across the 24 hours. Something to think about, at least.
Yeah, and I think you raise a good point, Ellen, because it's all very well for us I'll own that, for me to bang on about how important sleep is. But some people have enormous difficulty with sleep. Yeah. And so I do want to honour the fact that sleep and struggle go hand in hand. If we struggle, we don't sleep. And if we don't sleep, we struggle. Is oftentimes what I would observe in my coaching clients. And there are people who are doing all of these things and still struggle to sleep. And so there is absolutely a call then for, getting medical help and support. And the other thing that I've found interesting is there is an interplay of other things. Hormones, for example, can really affect our sleep. And those of us who are perimenopausal or menopausal, or even just, noticing through your cycle that there are times of the month when you wake in the night at 3 a.m. and you are wired awake. And I remember before I discovered the wonderful HRT, just walking around the streets in the night at 3 a.m. because I just was wired and I didn't know, and it wasn't spoken about, that there is a hormonal kind of, factor to that. And so I know we can't talk about it much now, but I am totally an advocate of HRT, and I'd like to do a whole podcast on that because I think us women are not speaking often enough about these things. But there are other factors at play here, and I don't want to minimise for people that it can be problematic. Personally, I'm a big advocate of melatonin. And there is some good sort of research about using melatonin. Here in Australia, you need a script, and that can be very helpful for getting to sleep. The other thing that Michael Mosley's sort of talking about recently is what he calls sleep restriction therapy. And you can read more about this in his book, Fast Asleep. But he's sort of saying that if we have trouble getting to sleep or we wake in the night, that if you are not getting back to sleep within sort of, 15 to 20 minutes, that you get up and you go and you read and you go outside the room until you feel sleepy, and then you come back in. And he's saying, do not have an association with your bed that is for anything other than sex and sleeping. Actually, your whole bedroom. So your laptop and your TV and Netflix would not be allowed. You'll have to go. And so if you are finding that you can't sleep, you get up and you wait until you are really sleepy. And he says that you actually go through a process of having less sleep, so you're really, really, really tired. And, he kind of guides people through a process like that, which could be useful.
And long-time listeners of the show might remember my interview with Dr. Kate Sprecher, who is a sleep expert. And we talked about that as well. And that's been something that's really stuck with me, because I've had those moments of the 3 a.m. wake up and reminding myself that I think she gave it a 20-minute window. If you can't get back to sleep within 20 minutes, then you get up and go and do something, whether that's read a book or, preferably not get on your device and end up down a Twitter rabbit hole like I have. But, do something and then try again. And she went into a lot of the mechanics of sleep and how this works with your circadian rhythms. And I think that sleep restriction idea, and she had a great term for it and it's not coming to mind, but I'll put the link in for anyone who's interested in listening to that, in terms of being able to find a way to reset some of those circadian rhythms to increase the likelihood of good sleep. So there's lots of great research out there. Yes. And you mentioned Dr. Matthew Walker's book as well, which, again, we'll put a link to for people who are keen to understand a bit more about the mechanics of sleep.
I think the important thing that we want to say to listeners is that if you are not getting to sleep or you're awake in the night, kind of the worst thing you can do is panic about not sleeping. So, that is a bit kind of counterintuitive when we've fed you information about, losing 90 minutes of sleep will reduce your daytime alertness by a third, and 4 hours is like drinking a 6-pack of beer. So sorry about that, folks, but I don't want you to lie there stressing about that. Look, it is actually normal to have periods of time when we wake, and one night of that we'll get over it. The worst thing you can do is lying there anxiously, worrying about not sleeping. And so that's why I think we want an empowered response to this is a little bit of a check at the time. If it's still, 20 minutes later, you go, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to get up and I'm going to go and do something. I did it last night. Monday, I don't know why, Sunday night, so, a bit wide for the week. And another thing that I've sort of read about and been trying is to try and do a to-do list just when I'm getting ready for bed. So I unload all of those things that often circulate. So just writing them down. And so sometimes I write that in the notes on my phone, but obviously I'll have to get rid of that. But just, writing, brain dump before bed, because it's all that stuff circulating that doesn't help. But then I did do the 3 a.m. wake up, and I waited for a while, and then I got up and I had some melatonin, went out, finished my book actually. I was near the end. And I did go back to sleep, which oftentimes I haven't when that's happened. So there you go. So it'll be good. You and I will have to set that in play across the week. I'll try and get rid of my phone and bring the book in rather than the phone, perhaps, would be a good plan for me. And I also think I'll try that writing a to-do list. So I'll take up a little notebook and tie that in. Do you remember in our very, very, very first podcast session, we asked people to do, their quest was to write down 3 things that went well and why. So I think I might combine that back in, and I'll take my notebook up and I'll do the things that went well. So I go to bed with a nice sense of being reminded of what was good in my day, which is really calming and good for my brain. And I'll just dump out anything I might worry about. So that might be my quest. What are you going to do? What's going to be your thing to focus on?
My thing to focus on this week will just be keeping to my primary school bedtime hours.
I love it.
And particularly trying to do that across my whole family, because I have a child who's now on holidays as well. I'm finding that they're getting more and more resistant to going to bed, and that keeps me up. And so trying to stick to the routine in the Christmas period with events and activities as much as possible. So that will be my quest. Something that I always try to do over summer, but
teenage kids, so I hear you on that one.
Good.
Beautiful.
And I've tried to explain to mine that the whole thing about your body doesn't know that it's school holidays and it works on a 24-hour cycle, and we should try and maintain the same bedtime and wake up time every day. But
do you get some eye rolls?
Well, I always get eye rolls when I talk about things like that. But also conscious that, for one in particular who is now in his teens, that there's a whole lot of other developmental stuff that's going on for them as well. So maybe I'll do a little bit of reading on that too. That might be another part of my quest is understanding the developmental changes and the need for sleep for teens. So
there's some really good stuff. That Headspace, we can maybe put that in the show notes as well. There's a really good fact sheet from Headspace about teenagers' sleep and about, why they need to sleep, how much they need, and some particular statistics that relate to teens.
Excellent. I will read up on that, and we'll put a link to the National Sleep Foundation's resources as well, because they've got a whole lot of really good stuff on sleep.
Great. There we go. We've done justice to the poor relation of sleep today.
I hope we have. And we are coming back together for our final episode of our How to Thrive series. We're going to wrap things up and talk a little bit about one of our favourite topics for both you and I. We're going to keep that a secret. But in the meantime, go forth, everyone, on your quest for good sleep and nurture generally. It's not just about the sleep, all of those other bits and pieces as well, especially during a time where a lot of those things get thrown out the window, and that's okay too. If you're going to celebrate Christmas and the end of year, then do that. And maybe this is a good one to have a listen to again come the new year, when we're starting to reset all of our rhythms and routines and new goals. But we look forward to being back with you.
We do.
For the final episode. Thanks, Marie.
See you then, Ellen.
Thank you, as always, for sharing our How to Thrive conversation today. I hope this episode has got you thinking about how you nurture your well-being. And if you're keen to follow up on any of the resources that Marie and I have mentioned today, particularly those for getting better sleep, you'll find everything in the show notes for the episode at potential.com.au/podcast or in the notes for this episode on your podcast app. And we've included links to a couple of past conversations that I've had with sleep experts Dr. Kate Sprecher and Professor Siobhan Banks here on the show. Both are well worth a listen if you're interested in the mechanics of sleep, the implications of sleep deprivation on your cognitive and your other functions, and work-related sleep topics such as shift work. And we have Marie's tips on nurture available via the show notes for this episode too. In fact, the full suite of Beacon tip and resource sheets that Marie has created just for you are now available on her website at needtoseesomeone.com and also via the show notes at potential.com.au/podcast. And next week is our very last How to Thrive special series shows, co-hosted with Marie McLeod. We'll do a little wrap-up for you and start looking forward to creating hope and plans for a happier and healthier 2022 with lots of practical tips and tools in there for you. It's the inspiration and guidance you need to get ready for a great new year after perhaps a couple of tough ones. I'm really excited about this episode and so looking forward to bringing it to you. But in the meantime, of course, as always, go forth on your quest to thrive and maybe get better sleep and take small steps to fulfill your potential.